Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to another one of Nathan Bell's commentary videos. Like and subscribe, and don't forget to give it a share if you know someone that'd be interested. Today, Nate wants to talk about Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, I'm always watching the world leaders, because I'm a guy who predicts nuclear war, so I always have to pay attention to what's going on in the geopolitical sphere. Vladimir Putin's an interesting character. Personally, I think he's a madman. He's a bit of a maniac. Former KGB operative, so, very tied in, presumably to the philosophy of Soviet Russia and the USSR. A lot of people would say that Putin wants to go back to those days. My support worker Ezekiel Locke seems to think Putin wants to go back to those days that he never really let go of Soviet rule over Russia. Certainly it's become apparent that Putin still views a lot of the nations that used to be former Soviet satellite states, he still views them as Russian property. He's one of these men where he thinks he can come in and say that he owns another country, or that his nation owns another country. So I don't like that. I don't like leaders who feel that a nation is entitled to claim ownership over another nation. He would argue, for example, in the case of the Ukraine, he would probably say that Ukrainians want to be a part of Russia, but I don't think anyone accepts that. I think it's quite apparent that Ukrainians don't want to be a part of Russia. He certainly feels that Ukraine belongs to Russia and is the property of Russia and is a territory of Russia. It's hard to say whether Vladimir Putin is popular in Russia. There's a facade of democracy in Russia. There are elections, but I feel the elections are rigged, and it seems to be the general consensus of the international community that Putin rigs the elections. We can see that Putin kills his opposition. Any real opposition to Putin always seems to magically die. So we can assume that Putin is orchestrating the deaths of any of his political opposition. So he's been in power, nearly 20 years now, 15, 20 years. He was the president, then he was the prime minister, and then now he's the president again. And he even changed the constitution of Russia so that he could run for another 2 terms, extending his leadership into over 2030. So it's clear that he wants to stay in power. He has his own agenda, and he doesn't want to let go of power because he has a clear direction that he wants to take Russia. So what will he do to stay in power? Will he further amend Russia's constitution to allow himself to stay in power indefinitely? Certainly the elections held in Russia seem to be fraudulent, and he takes out any political opposition and oppresses any political opposition. So it doesn't seem to be a genuine democracy. He's made numerous, and as I said, the big thing about Putin is he's happy to invade nations, like he invaded the Crimea and claimed them as Russian territory. He's done this several times. He's invaded sovereign territories and claimed them as Russian territory with the Crimea and now with the Ukraine. He's embarrassed himself with this Ukraine war. Last I checked, he wasn't doing very well. It's still going on. It's been over 2 years now. Been around 2 years now. I think Putin thought he was going to go into the Ukraine and just smash it and take over the country very easily, but that hasn't been the case. The Ukrainians have fought back furiously, so it's a bit of an embarrassment to Putin. He hasn't won the war, and it hasn't turned out how he expected it to turn out, which just shows that people won't tolerate dominance. The Ukrainian people have shown their spirit. They won't tolerate Russia coming in and claiming ownership of their country. They expect their sovereignty, and that's why freedom fighters, mate, they fight with passion and they fight with heart, and they fight for their sovereignty, and that's why they always win. That's why guerrilla fighters and stuff always kick so much butt, because they believe in what they're doing. They're not just heartless drones fighting because they're given orders to. But Putin has made numerous threats on numerous occasions. It's funny because sometimes he seems to come out and say, I remember on one occasion he came out and said, the escalation of war to the use of nuclear weapons would mean the destruction of civilization. He says that one week, then a couple of months later there'll be another statement come out where he'll say, he'll basically say, if provoked, we will use nuclear weapons, and it will mean the end of civilization. So he's unstable. He seems to toss and turn back and forth. But I do think he is the sort of man that would launch a nuclear attack. He recently said that if NATO sends troops into Ukraine, which I don't think there's any signal that NATO is going to directly send troops into Ukraine, but he came out and he said if NATO sends troops into Ukraine, it will likely result in the escalation to the use of nuclear weapons and the destruction of civilization. I think we've got to watch out for Putin because I think he is the sort of unhinged maniac that would strike first. So we have to be concerned that he will strike first if he feels provoked or backed into a corner. And he's the sort of guy, if he feels like he's pushing for something, he's pushing his agenda and he's pushing out on the world. And if he feels like he's going to fall back or he's going to get pushed back, he may resort to the use of nuclear weapons. So he's the sort of unhinged maniac that might provoke a nuclear war, which is my big concern because even more than climate change, I think nuclear war is one of the biggest threats to humanity, and we've got this unhinged maniac in Russia who looks like he could potentially use nuclear weapons. But it does seem we've returned to the proxy war status. It seems there are all these proxy wars happening now. So some people might say we're back in a new Cold War era. It's hard to say. But with the Ukraine and the annexation of the Crimea and Putin's continuing advances into sovereign territory, and it seems we're back in this proxy war situation where we're facing standoffs between the West and Russia. And Putin's very isolationist now. He doesn't like to cooperate with other nations. He doesn't like to come to the table for diplomacy and debate and discussion. He always likes to be very standoffish and argumentative. He's not a cooperator. He doesn't cooperate with the international community. He's always alienating himself from the global community with his remarks and with his positions on things. So he doesn't want to get along. He seems to want Russian dominance and Russian superiority again. So, this is what you get when you bring someone who was a part of the KGB and a loyalist to the USSR into being the leader of the nation. It's just a continuation of what the Soviets were doing. It's just a continuation of that regime through Putin. There is the facade of elections, but I don't think the elections are sincere. I think they're rigged. And we recently saw the death of one of Putin's main political opponents. I can't remember the man's name, but it was all over the news only a few weeks ago. And the Russian authorities have said that man died from sudden death syndrome. He died in prison where he was being kept for opposing Putin. He died in prison, and there's no clarity around how he died. And the Russian authorities have said he died of sudden death syndrome. What rubbish! He was murdered by the Russian authorities on the call of Putin. So Putin is a dangerous man, and there are many. This is the problem with leaders. There's so many dangerous leaders in the world, and I critique the West heavily as well, and there are dangerous leaders in the West. But definitely with regards to Putin, I'm certainly not a Putin sympathiser. He's a maniac, and he won't cooperate, and he has his own agenda of dominance, and he wants to dominate the globe, and he wants Russian superiority, and he wants to claim back all those former Soviet states of the Soviet Union and bring them back under the fold of Russia. Dangerous man Vladimir Putin, who we should all watch out for, who might provoke World War III, and who seems like the sort of lunatic who would use nuclear weapons, has made numerous threats saying he will use nuclear weapons in the past, and continues to provoke unrest around the global community. So a man to watch out for. So drop a comment in the comment section about what you think about Vladimir Putin.